I call the Honourable Member Giles Chevelle.
Thank you, Mr Chairman, and congratulations on your acting chairmanship in today's debate. I just want to say a couple of things in response to what the ministers just told the committee. I think it would be very useful if what he's just said was right, and if we were going to see comprehensive regulation and enforcement from one body and one body only. But the problem with the system that is being constituted by the Financial Markets Regulators and Kiwisaver Bill in Part 2 in particular, creating the Financial Markets Authority, is that of course it doesn't quite go that far. When the markets are faced with situations of criminal behaviour, in particular serious fraud, then the Serious Fraud Office, or perhaps on occasion the police, will sometimes step in, either on a complaint or because they're investigating other conduct. Now, of course, it's the case that if you've got the SFO or the police involved, investigating matters on a criminal basis, you're simply going to find that the FMA is deadlocked out of the process, and it will have no option in most situations but to simply stand aside and wait till the criminal investigation conducted by most usually the Serious Fraud Office has been completed. And as we all know, these criminal investigations, because of the safeguards that are necessary in them, given the penalties that can be suffered, can take some time. This can have a significant chilling effect on any regulator's inquiry into a particular course of conduct. So I'm afraid the Minister oversold these reforms on at least one important aspect when he gave his contribution earlier. And I think it is important to point out that unless and until we get to some sort of regulatory and investigative principle in this country relating to the primacy of an investigator, where investigators or regulatory or enforcement bodies, all of which have some sort of overlapping jurisdiction in respect of some particular matter, can by some overriding statutory authority simply agree that it will be the jurisdiction of one of them and one of them only to go forward with the investigation, then we are going to have this overlap still. And it is going to be a problem. You can see it in all sorts of areas. Transport accident investigations is one that springs to mind, but there are many, many others where overlapping regulatory or enforcement bodies can prevent the speedy and expeditious conclusion of a particular inquiry. That is what's still going to happen in respect of financial and securities markets where there is fraud, and in particular serious fraud, alleged even after this bill is passed by the House, if that's what the House decides to do. So I wanted to make a couple of other points. The Minister talked about the comprehensive nature of this reform. I think I've indicated one area where that's an overblown claim. The other area is one that I touched on in an earlier contribution, and that is the failure of this Parliament still to address the fringe lending sector of the market. And this bill still doesn't go far enough in that regard. It is the case that we need comprehensive regulation across the market. The sort of reform that's advocated for by my colleague Leanne Dalzell in the supplementary order paper that she's now tabled would be very useful if there were actually a set of principles that bound all participants in all financial markets, and if it were up to the Financial Markets Authority to then fill in the meaning of these principles in any particular context, we would have progress. But that is not, despite the advocacy of Labor members on the Commerce Committee, that is not the way that the government has decided to proceed. And I think in particular it would be useful just to consider how the principles that are contained in the supplementary order paper would fall to apply in respect of the fringe lending sector. the scheme of the supplementary order paper that Leanne Dalzell's put forward is based on, as she said, the English legislation, Mr Chairman.
The Honourable Giles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. The English legislation is the Financial Services and Markets Act 2007, and I have a copy of the relevant section. Section 64 allows the Financial Services Authority, as it's called in England, to issue statements of principle and codes of practice. And I think I said 2007. I should have said 2010. 2000. 2000. I beg your pardon. I can't read your writing, Leanne. The legislation in Section 64 allows these statements of principle and these codes of practice to be issued. That happens, and then the authority fills in, as I said before, what they actually mean in any particular case. Now, in the supplementary order paper, Leanne Dalzell referred to obligations around a particular provider's communications with customers. And the proposal that she's tabled is that a firm must pay due regard to the information needs of its customers and communicate information to them in a way which is clear, fair and not misleading. Now, my colleague said that she felt this would deal with the issue of celebrity endorsements. And this is that has to be faced. It's a shame that the Cabinet's kicked it for touch, that it's waiting for yet another report. That report, we hear from the Minister, isn't going to be ready till May. Meanwhile, times are tough out there, and these celebrity endorsements do influence people. I think particularly of the fringe lenders, where you have Stacey Jones and others saying, look, this finance company's a fantastic one. And guess, well, Sam, the Honourable Member ought to listen to this contribution because he knows the demographic to which that appeals. And this Parliament's failed to prevent those sort of practices despite having the opportunity time and time again. And what happens? People continue to get ripped off because they think, gee, that sportsman is a real icon, a real hero of mine. If he or she is endorsing a product, then it must be a really good one. It must be one we can trust, and therefore we'll invest our money without much further thought. That is a real shame. Unfortunately, under the provisions of this bill, that will be able to continue, and it is not something that we should think is desirable. It would be much better to go along with the sort of proposal that the Minister indicated the government would be voting against, but which Leanne Dalzell's put up, which says that there are these principles to bind all financial markets participants. They're to comply with those principles, and their conduct over time will elevate, and these sorts of rip-offs will stop. See, the last point that I want to make in respect of Part 2 relates to the financial literacy point, and arises out of the issues that I've just been speaking to. In the end, until we deal fair and square in this country with the issue of financial literacy, then it doesn't matter what regulations or what laws we pass, we're still going to have major problems in this area. And this is particularly the case in respect of the fringe lending sector that I mentioned before. And again, there's something of a disappointing result when this bill's looked at in the round on the financial literacy point. The committee, in reporting it back, has acknowledged that there's some work being done by the Retirement Commissioner already in this area. There's a subsidiary function for the Financial Markets Authority that's enhanced somewhat, but still there's no one in New Zealand responsible on behalf of the government for trying to improve people's basic levels of understanding about financial products on offer in the market. And until somebody is tasked with that responsibility fairly and squarely, until there's a minister responsible for that agency, accountable to this Parliament, then we're still going to have major problems in this area with people being able to understand the basic types of product on offer. So, Sarah, I would say that the claims that the Minister's made about comprehensive reform are brave. Certainly nobody could deny that this is a step forward, in particular the provisions of Part 2. But in respect of the significant omissions that I've identified around financial literacy and the failure to really come up with a comprehensive code of conduct that ought to apply across the markets so that we can actually as the committee said, facilitate the confident and informed participation of business, investors and consumers in financial markets, this House won't have done its job, sir.
I call